Chapter 9. The Road to Rhizon. Laggy and Rua noticed more travellers on the roads now that they had entered Illyria. Scythia had been harsh country. Things were greener here, and there were more homes and more people in general. After a few days of travelling, they heard a woman screaming just ahead of them. They had come upon 2 men and a young woman. One of the men had a whip and was beating her with it. There were bloody marks on her arms and legs from where she had been hit. The woman reminded Laggy of his sister. She was about her age and looked a little like her, but with lighter-coloured skin. "Stop doing that to her!" Laggy yelled to the man. The man stopped and turned to Laggy. "This is a Ligur slave, and it's none of your business." "I am making it my business," stated Laggy firmly. "I am an Illyrian slaver. She is now our property," said the man as he cracked his whip in the air over her. She ducked and trembled in fear. Laggy drew his sword and shouted sternly, "Stop doing that to her!" Rua took his bow from his back and notched an arrow. The second man behind the slaver drew a sword. The slaver looked surprised and stepped back and stopped for a moment. He now considered carefully these 2 strangers that stood in front of him. Apparently fearful, the slaver started to soften. "Okay, there's no need for that sort of thing," said the slaver. "As soon as we brought her to heel, we were going to collect our money at the slavers' market. For 23 silvers, she's yours," offered the slaver. Laggy counted out the silver and handed it to him. The slaver grabbed the rope around her hands, pulled her, and shoved her towards Laggy. "There you go. Good luck with this little Ligur bitch," spat the slaver. Laggy had had all he could take. Anger raged in his eyes. He swung the sword as hard as he could and, with the flat of his blade, struck the man on the side of his head. There was a tremendous whack sound when it hit. The slaver fell. His 23 silver coins scattered out over the ground, and he was out cold. The second man backed up slowly, then turned and fled. The young woman ran to Laggy and hugged him and sobbed. "It's okay, and he caught himself as he started to call her sis, but he stopped before he finished. "Rua, fetch her some water. Hold your hands out and I will cut the rope," said Laggy as he freed her. Rua handed her the water. She drank thirstily. "I am Laggy, and this is Rua. Oh, and this is Palu, our goat. Let's get off this main road in case the other man comes back with more of his kind." They got off the road and headed north for a time, until the light grew dim. They found a concealed place in the trees where they could stop and make camp for the night. The young woman's name was Katrin. Rua brought her more water and some food. Her skin looked so white and pale, Rua thought. Rua's stomach was all balled up again, like before, and he could barely speak to her. She thanked him, and he nodded in return. She told them she was from the country of Liguria, just north of Illyria, and that the king of Illyria had reinstituted slavery. Her father and mother had been captured and were being held in a camp just outside the capital city. She had escaped from the camp and was free for a short time before the slavers with the whip found her. They finished setting up camp after they finished their meal and went to sleep for the night. The next day, before they broke camp, Rua walked over to Katrin with his bow and arrows in hand. He stammered a bit. "I want you," he paused awkwardly, "to have this," and he handed her the bow and arrows. Laggy was watching. The poor kid. He is so balled up inside he can barely speak, Laggy thought. She kind of likes him. If only he could relax a little. "I can teach you how to use it," he paused again. "If you like. I learned how from a Scythian nomad." She looked at it quizzically. how does it work?" she asked. He took the bow and an arrow from her, notched it, pulled back, and shot at a nearby tree, where it struck the bark and bounced off. "Like that," he told her as he handed the bow back to her. She smiled at him. "Thank you, Rua." That day they followed the condor, which headed mostly to the west and then northwest. They were in the lower foothills of the mountains and could see a good distance to the west and south. At some point they saw smoke rising high into the sky. As they got closer, they could see it was a very large city. To the south of the city was a river that ran into the sea. Laggy and Rua were amazed at the size of the city. The northeastern corner of the city was covered with thick black smoke. They could see fires still burning. Laggy thought he could barely make out the sound of screams in the distance. With the threat of slavers, they dared not get any closer. "That is Ligure town burning," Katrin exclaimed. "Those are Ligurian homes and businesses burning down there. This is tragic." Katrin stopped and stared silently at the city below for a while. Rua and Laggy were concerned for her, but Laggy spoke up. He always seemed to have the right words for everything. "I am so sorry for you and your people," said Laggy. He walked over to her and put his arm around her shoulder to comfort her. She leaned into him and wept quietly. "If that is Ligure town, are we now in Liguria then?" asked Laggy. "No," she said, gathering herself up. "We are in Illyria. Ligure town is part of Amantia, the capital city of Illyria, where Ligurians live with Illyrians. It is the largest city in Illyria, and perhaps anywhere. And Illyria is the wealthiest country in the world, and Amantia is the wealthiest city in Illyria. And what is that river that runs south of the city? And what is that vast sea?" asked Laggy. "The river is called Dafi Saida. It is said to mean the warm lady. It is warm because it comes from the hot sea, and it runs into the cold sea. The cold sea is full of life and has no known end," she finished. They continued to walk, and the condor started turning northwards. They were all glad to see this change of direction. Even Palu had a lighter step. Perhaps he sensed the change in their demeanour. "Why do you follow that bird?" asked Katrin as she brushed back her short, straight black hair with her hands. "Laggy had a sister, a little like you," Rua stammered. "She was lost," said Rua. "He thinks the bird is his sister, returned from the dead." "Do you think he is mad?" she asked, her green eyes blinking back at him with her brows furrowed. "No," said Rua quietly, looking down, a little hurt that she asked this about his companion whom he liked and respected. "Whatever he is," she thought, "he saved me from the slavers, and that's good enough for me." That night, after they all were fast asleep, Palu the goat began to stomp his front feet. He gave a sharp wheeze of air, awakening everyone from their sleep. Laggy grabbed his sword and a stick from the fire, Rua his spear, and Katrin her new bow. "Quiet! The goat is warning us," Laggy said in a whisper. Again, the goat stomped his front feet, looking east towards the mountains. Then they all heard from that direction a low growl and then another. Eyes reflecting the firelight appeared in the thicket. 10 dogs burst out into the edge of the camp. Laggy yelled, "No!" and held his arms outstretched, looking as large as he could. The animals stopped and stood motionless, growling. Laggy could see the animals looked to be thin and starving. "Rua, bring the meat sack, slow and steady. Don't turn your back on them." Rua brought the sack. Laggy took out 6 scraps of dried jerky and threw them to the animals. The dogs hungrily grabbed the meat. Each one that got a piece immediately turned and fled. Some followed. They began growling and fighting over the food as they returned in the direction from which they had come. "Thank you, little brown goat," Laggy whispered as he scratched the goat behind his ears. The little goat had possibly saved their lives that night by waking them up before they were taken by surprise. Laggy had everyone break camp, and they quickly headed north, traveling in the darkness and through the next day. A day later, they came to an area where the trees and vegetation had been laid bare. Laggy had a bad feeling about this, as it looked like the South Island in the last days. "What is this?" Laggy asked. "This has been happening since the earthquake, as have other strange things," answered Catherine. "Have people gone missing?" asked Laggy. "Yes, and farmhouses and barns and livestock. All have disappeared, but I didn't know it was this far south. This is inside the Illyrian borders. This is the sickness we fought on the islands. I'm sure of it," he said. "What sickness?" she asked. Laggy proceeded to tell her of their experiences on the islands with the sickness and how it led him to where he was now. Catherine continued to practice with the bow and arrow. Rua was getting better at speaking to her. He had taught her well. Laggy thought she was shooting the bow better than Rua ever had. She was a natural with it. He hoped she didn't need to use it, but welcomed any help he could get. Aside from the threats from the hot sea itself, this place was a lot more dangerous than the islands. Then one day, Catherine asked Laggy a question. "Laggy, now that my parents are missing, I don't have any family aside from my uncle in Rhizon. We are headed that way. I want to visit him to see if he has heard any news and let him know that I'm safe. After that, I want to continue to travel with you and Rua, if that's okay." "Let me think on that one," answered Laggy. The day came when they saw Rhizon on the horizon. "That is Rhizon," Catherine pointed. "We need to get more supplies. Can you help us find our way around?" asked Laggy. "Yes. Have you thought about my question?" she asked. "I want to meet your uncle and see what he says," answered Laggy. They entered Rhizon. The streets were busy. It looked like the rangers were on the move. Catherine led them to her uncle's house, where she knocked on the door. No one answered. She walked to the neighbors and knocked. A young girl answered. "I am looking for my Uncle Has, who lives next door," she said, pointing to his house. "Have you seen him?" "Let me get my mum," the young girl said, and she returned a little later with a middle-aged woman. "He has left some time ago. I think he's out looking for you and your parents," the neighbor lady answered. "I'm okay, but my parents were taken by the slavers in Illyria. If my uncle has gone there, he is in grave danger. They are taking all Ligurians as slaves to work in the silver mines," said Catherine. "Oh dear," she exclaimed. The neighbor lady led them into her uncle's place, and they stayed there for the night, even Palu the goat. The goat left tiny little brown pellets on the floor, no bigger than raisins, but Catherine cleaned up after him in the morning before they left. That night, Laggy finally conceded. "Okay, you can come with us." Catherine ran over and gave Laggy a big hug. "Thank you, Laggy." Rua was smiling too. He would miss her if she were gone. Laggy didn't know if she was safer with them or without them. If her uncle had been at home, then he might have insisted she stay with him. The next day they went to the market and stocked up on food and arrows for Catherine's bow. Laggy purchased a replacement bow and arrows for Rua to carry. He also purchased a knife for each of them to tuck into their belts. "You never know when you might have to cut a slaver's rope," he thought, as he made the purchase. When they were done shopping for supplies, They found a young man outside the shop who had been cornered by Palu the goat. The man held his hands high in the air as the goat feasted on his clothing. The young man looked very confused and frightened. "Help!" he said. Catherine walked over. "Ma'am, could you help me?" he asked. "It is eating my clothes." Catherine took out some rope and swatted at the goat with it. "Leave it," she said. The goat quickly trotted away. "Thank you," the young man said with a look of relief. Laggy and Rua were smiling and holding back their urge to laugh. "Let's go find Sis," Laggy said, looking down and shaking his head as he walked. They started looking for the condor and found her circling just east of town. They followed the east road out of town, and the condor once again led the way. The weather was cool and crisp. The skies were grey and overcast from clouds that had settled in. The fall season was upon them, and winter would be coming soon. The trio and the goat travelled a couple of days to the east when they saw something in the sky approaching quickly. There were 3 smaller blackbirds flying straight towards their condor at high speed. This is the first they had seen anything like this. The birds were flying higher than the condor, and they began to dive once they got close. As the 3 blackbirds met her, the first bird's talons met hers. The second bird missed, flying beneath her. The third hit her on the back, midway up her spine. She spun in the air and hit the last one with her talons as it passed. Sis is hit, but she managed to hit one of the smaller birds on the upper part of its leg. Or was it the wing? It is hard to tell this far away, thought Laggy, as he watched with great concern. The wounded bird went into a spin and lost altitude, disappearing into the treetops. The 2 remaining blackbirds circled back for another attack. One bird dove and missed her. The other dove fast and hit her wing hard. Feathers exploded and then drifted in the sky. She began to spin and fall at a tremendous rate. She might be unconscious. She could plunge to her death, thought Laggy in a panic. After falling for what seemed like forever, she put her good wing out and the other wing partially out and started to spiral. "She is coming down," he thought. "Hang on, Sis, we are coming." "Come on, everyone, pick up the pace," Laggy urged. They began to run down the road towards where the condor was coming down. She continued to spiral downward until she hit the ground ahead of them with a thud from the impact. They ran up to her to get a better look. She got back up on her feet, but was unsteady at best. Laggy looked up. The 2 remaining birds were still circling in the sky directly above, and they were beginning to dive. "Look up!" Laggy yelled as he pulled his sword. Rua grabbed his spear and Catherine her bow. The 3 of them gathered around the condor in a circle and faced upward. Down the birds came, despite their defensive posture. As they got closer, the birds looked more like misshapen creatures of the night than birds. Laggy took a swing with his sword, but missed as the sword was too short to reach. Jabbing upwards with his spear, Rua hit one of the creatures in the leg. Catherine fired an arrow at the creature hovering directly above her and hit it in the wing. Down it came. The last creature, still flying, dove with its talons extended and hit the condor on her back. She cried out in pain. Now in range, Laggy swung his sword and took its head off. Down it went, still flapping as it did. The remaining wounded creature was still alive. Laggy dispatched it by cutting off its head at the neck with one swing of his sword. Laggy offered the condor some dried jerky meat and some water, but she took neither. That night they all slept uneasily. The next morning they offered her some food and water again. This time she took a small amount of water. Then she sat, hunched over, not moving much. Laggy decided to stay put until she was feeling better. By the 3rd day she had taken a little food and more water. Laggy grabbed a stick from a nearby tree and took it over to the condor. He gently placed it at her feet and urged her to mount it. He then carried her to the goat, where he gently placed her on the goat's back. She had been on the goat's back a few other times of her own free will. Maybe this will work, he thought. She stepped off the stick onto Palu's back. The others saw this, and Katrin was amazed. Rua had seen it before, but was still somewhat amazed at the sight of it. This might work. Let's give her another day and try to travel tomorrow. Laggy put the stick next to her feet and urged her onto the stick again. She stepped on it, and he carried her back over to the spot where she had been resting on the ground. The next day they rose, ate some barley cakes, and were ready to travel by first light. The days were growing shorter and darker. Laggy helped the condor onto Palu's back using a stick. They started down the road again, continuing to head east. Laggy walked behind the goat and kept a close eye on Sis. As they travelled, they saw more areas that had been clear-cut and looked desolate. Wherever they were headed, they were getting closer and closer to the source of the problem. "Are there travertine caves in these mountains?" asked Laggy. "I don't know what those are, but there are caves in the mountains," answered Katrin. "Why do you ask?" "Our islands are made mostly of travertine stone. We found the creatures inside the caves on our island. They might be in the caves here as well," he answered as he shivered from the cold air of the mountains. A couple of days later, Katrin spoke up. "Look there! Something is moving on the other side of the field." There appeared to be two figures skirting the edge of a clear-cut field. They then changed direction and began to head towards Laggy's group. She pointed. "Two of them approach us." "I see them," said Laggy. As they came closer, he could see they were not humans but creatures, and other than their tattered clothing being different, they looked the same as those on the islands. Laggy drew his sword. "Get your weapons ready!" Rua drew out his spear, and Katrin took out her bow and notched an arrow. The creatures continued to approach at a steady pace. When they got close enough, they began charging at a dead run. Laggy and Rua stood two abreast to block them. Katrin stood behind with the goat and the condor. They came crashing in, bearing raised stone axes. Laggy swung his sword with all his might and hit one creature in the neck, severing its head from its body. Rua thrust his spear, and the creature deflected it with its stone axe. The spear blade grazed the creature's shoulder. It didn't bleed but a drop or two. The creature brought the axe down on top of Rua's left arm at the shoulder. Rua pitched and fell to the ground, grabbing his arm where it was wounded. With a clear shot, Katrin fired her bow. The arrow glanced off the creature's shoulder and vanished beyond. The creature raised up its axe directly above the condor, about to crush her with the next blow. The little brown goat put its head down and stomped its foot about to charge. "No, sis!" Laggy screamed out. In that split second, he thought, they seemed to be targeting her. The condor opened her mouth, and out came a stream of regurgitated meats and incredibly strong acid from her stomach. The acid hit the creature directly in the face and eyes. The creature was instantly blinded and swung its axe wildly, missing everyone. Laggy swung his sword, hitting the creature's axe, which was flailing about. With one hand, Rua thrust his spear directly into the head of the creature, and at the same moment Katrin fired an arrow into its eye. The creature dropped to the ground, twitching, and then stopped moving. Katrin grabbed an empty sack and ran to Rua's aid. She cut a strip with her knife and tied it around his bleeding arm. Rua didn't want to look weak. He thanked her for the help and smiled gratefully. "You fought bravely, Rua. Thank the gods of the cold sea you are okay," she said as she smiled back at him. She took his hand in hers and held it for a time. Rua's pain vanished as thoughts of her filled his mind, and his smile strengthened. Laggy walked over to the condor. He wanted to hug her, but he thought better of it. "Oh, sis," he said very quietly, and he leaned over gently to get a closer look at her injuries. "You are full of surprises. I'm so glad you're okay." The next morning, they were up early. Laggy could see his breath in the nippy air. Laggy noticed that Rua and Katrin were snuggling up together when he got up. After the two finally woke up, she tended to Rua's wound by re-wrapping it with a clean cloth. They resumed their travels. Rua and Katrin walked hand in hand at times that day. Laggy smiled at the thought of it. It made him happy to see them finding each other in this way. Eventually, they came to a steep, freshly cut canyon that opened into a valley with large empty spaces before them. "This must be the Lost Valley," said Katrin. "It was found after the earthquake opened the canyon, but I heard it was a paradise. I wonder what happened to it." "It looks ravaged, like our islands after the infection," said Rua. Laggy frowned at the sight of it. "It's the creatures," said Rua. "They have done this." The road led them to a primitive town. There was a scratched-up wooden sign on the road that said, "Welcome to Dieterstown." Rangers were camping in tents just on the edge of town, and there were a lot of them. "Those are rangers," Katrin observed as they walked past the tents. Laggy nodded. He could see they were well armed and looked fit as well. "We will get a room and start again in the morning." Some of the rangers were standing on the front porch of the inn. As they were about to enter, a couple of them hauled one ranger out that looked to have had too much ale. The drunken ranger was mumbling something mostly unintelligible. "Get those goblins." One of the rangers carrying him said, "Take him down to the stream and sober him up." Then another ranger stopped and said, "Don't that be all? A condor riding on the back of a goat. Now I've seen everything." The men let down the drunk ranger, and he sat on the ground and fell over backwards, apparently unable to stand or sit on his own. One of the other rangers walked over to have a closer look. "Who owns this goat and this condor? And why does this condor ride on this goat?" he asked. Laggy walked over. "This is my goat. I own it. As far as the condor goes, no one owns her. She has been travelling with us. We followed her to this place. She was injured recently when attacked by some black creatures in the sky. So now she rides." "How strange!" exclaimed the ranger. "I am Finch," said the ranger. "This is our squad. Leaf Tuck, Deer Tig, and," he pointed down, "Ringnick. Where do you come from?" "My name is Laggy, and this is Rua and Katrin. We are from the islands of the Hot Sea, and Katrin is from Rhizon," Laggy answered. "I have never heard of the islands of the Hot Sea. Do you have any idea how dangerous the Lost Valley is? Why do you follow a condor to this place?" asked Finch. "The islands we come from are in the Hot Sea, far from shore. The condor flew to our island and landed there. I felt compelled to follow her, so I did. It has been a long and dangerous journey to get here," said Laggy. "Have you consulted an oracle?" "No," answered Laggy. "What is an oracle?" "An oracle looks for that which is beyond what the eyes can see. They look into the past, the present, and the future. And as far as the condors go, our people worship on the mountaintops, and condors are of spiritual significance to us," said Finch as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He continued, "We have to take care of our friend here. You people be careful and be safe. This is no place for a young lady such as yourself." He nodded to Katrin. "We are nearby if you need any help. Soon we will be marching to fight the goblins in the goblin caves. Good evening." The word goblin got Ringnick's attention, and he popped up and shouted, "Goblins!" before slumping back down. They parted ways from the rangers and got a room for the night at the inn. The goat and condor had to stay outside. The next morning, they were up with the sun. "Where to, Laggy?" Rua wanted to know. "We keep heading east," Laggy answered. They left town and continued to the east. Soon they approached a large forest. When they reached the edge of the trees, the condor unexpectedly hopped off Palu's back to the ground and started walking to the north. Laggy found a stick and put her back up on the goat. There she settled in again. They had changed direction for the first time since leaving Rhizon and continued along the edge of the forest, heading to the north. "These are aspens. Aspens live in groves. We find them everywhere in the Alps, but not down below," said Katrin. Some of the aspen leaves were starting to change colour from green to a brilliant red, orange, yellow, or a combination. Laggy had never seen anything like this. It took his breath away. It was so beautiful. He stopped and paused for a few moments and looked around. "Wow," whispered Laggy, as he tried to take it all in. The forest became thicker and more ancient with every step. Again, the condor hopped off the goat to the ground and walked in the forest for a while, then stopped. Laggy found another stick and put her back up on Palu, and they entered the forest. As they walked deeper into the forest, it grew darker and thicker, until the condor hopped off the goat again. This time she just stood there. She didn't walk in any direction. "What's this?" asked Laggy, as he stared at her. Everyone stood quietly waiting, but nothing happened. Finally, Laggy said, "Looks like this is it. Let's stay here for a while. Stay on guard while I look around." Laggy began exploring the nearby forest for a time. The trees were large and ancient. There was a calm, quiet energy to them. He sat down on a log and rested for a while. These aspens went on for as far as the eye could see. His eyes grew heavy. It had been a long, exhausting trip to get here. He began to nod off. Then Laggy heard in his mind's ear his father's voice. "Touch the trees." "Father?" Laggy asked without speaking. Laggy hesitated for a moment, his hand trembling a little. Then he lightly touched the tree in front of him. He could sense the trees here were one giant ancient organism. Beneath the trees, and surrounding their roots, another even larger ancient organism connected all the trees together, much like a web woven inside the earth. Laggy's vision darkened, and it felt like he was moving, as if being transported. Darkness gave way to light, and he was blinded momentarily. The light was all around him. "See that which was," the light said. He saw the world lush and green, covered with giant trees, and a land awash with life. There were strange animals he was not familiar with. The skies were blue, and the water was clear. Then he saw a change occurring. The change was moving across the land until it was everywhere. The land was now brown and smouldering. Desolation was far and wide. Life as he had seen it was gone. "Like my island," thought Laggy. "Yes," said the light. "See this." Laggy saw the energies of life. They connected all life together. It looked like a web of light. Laggy felt fully connected to it. "In previous lives, you have experienced all of the life forms in this world. It allows you to connect to the web strongly," said the light. "Change from killing to healing." Laggy slowly came back to normal consciousness. His hands were glowing. It almost felt like awakening from a sleep. Or was he asleep? He wasn't sure. He knew what they faced, and he thought to himself, I know what to do. Laggy began to dig in the dirt. Eventually the others began looking for Laggy, and they found him digging. Bring some sacks, please, Laggy requested. They brought him all the spare sacks they had. He picked out strands of white threads growing in the dirt. Dig, look for this and put it in the sack. We will take this back with us. I want to meet with the rangers when we get back, said Laggy. After a time, they packed up their sacks, loaded the condor onto Palu, and went back to town. They headed directly to the rangers' camp. On the edge of the camp, rangers stood watch. Laggy approached one. I would like to speak to whoever is in charge. Captain Alexander is in charge. What business do you have with the captain? Asked the ranger. I have information for him, to help him defeat the goblins, answered Laggy. One of the guards led them to the captain's tent. Wait here, he said, and he went in. A moment later he returned. Okay, you can go in. Laggy stepped in. Inside the tent were 3 rangers and a man with brown skin, who wore different garb than the rangers. Laggy recognized one of the rangers from the day before. It was Finch. Who is the captain? Asked Laggy. I am, said the grizzled, grey-bearded ranger. You, like Baco here, obviously aren't from around here. What are you doing here? He asked with a dubious look on his face. I am Laggy from the islands of the hot sea, said Laggy. I have some information that will help defeat the goblins. Finch spoke up. Captain, this is the one I was telling you about, with the condor. You followed a condor all the way here from the hot sea? Asked the captain. Yes, answered Laggy. Well, don't that beat all? That is very strange. Okay, Laggy from the hot sea, what do you have for me? Laggy proceeded to tell the captain about the Battle of the South Island, Hawea, who became sick in front of their eyes, and the journey to the trees in the Lost Valley. Laggy finished with, These goblins, they are our own people with a sickness that has transformed them in appearance and behavior, like Hawea on our island. Our people became sick from a fungus that is spread by the spores through the air that can settle in the lungs. There are many different types of fungus, and the ones I have collected can be used as an antidote to the infection. But we must administer it to the goblins, which won't be easy. I am suggesting we build nets to capture them, then administer the cure. Normally, I would throw you out, but Barco here has just told a similar story, said the captain, as he nodded to Barco. Laggy, taken by surprise, looked at Barco. You visited the trees? Yes, answered Barco. I am from Decilia. A desert falcon led me to the trees. Surprised, Laggy breathed a sigh of relief. It isn't just me. Are there more like me and Barco? He wondered. The captain spoke up. Have you cured anyone with this? No, answered Laggy. So all we have is your word. Well, that isn't good enough. We will put together a patrol to look for goblins. Laggy, you and Barco will join the patrol. Until then, my boys will build some nets. Captain, we are going to need the nets, but not just yet. Laggy held his hand aloft, and it was radiating light. What the? Said the captain with a gasp. By the gods, said Finch. The captain's tent door flew open, and Ringnick was standing there, breathing hard. I heard goblins are people with an illness, and there is a cure, he shouted. My wife and my baby are out there. If we can find them, they can be cured. Hold your horses. We don't know this for sure. We only have the word of 2 strangers that this might be so don't get your hopes up too high. "We are going to send out a patrol to find out if this works," said the captain. "Sir, I want to go with them." "I don't know about that. Ringnick, you have been performing poorly. I don't trust you out there." "Captain, please, I must go. My wife and my unborn kid are out there. Please," Ringnick pleaded with emotion. "Okay, this is against my better judgment. Get your squad together. We will send your squad out with Thomas's squad tomorrow. You will head west, where you are most likely to encounter goblins. Take the strangers Laggy and Barku with you." After the meeting with the captain, Laggy and Barku had a very long talk. Their stories were not exactly the same, but paralleled each other very closely, and their experiences with the trees left them with much of the same message. They spent time in preparation by practicing with the light that radiated from their hands before they called it a night. The next day, Laggy took a little time to talk to Rua and Katrin before he joined the Rangers. "Take care of each other while I am gone, and keep an eye on Palu and Sis. I've been feeding Sis dried jerky meat and water. Palu will find something to eat. Maybe your shirts if you don't keep an eye on him," he said with a smile. Katrin and Rua smiled and laughed a little at the thought of it. "Please stay close to town where it is safe. We will be back soon," said Laggy. Laggy joined the Rangers. Barku was waiting for him. They had talked for a long while the night before, and they had jointly agreed that everyone needed to wear face protection to keep them from breathing the spores. They handed out pieces of cloth and showed the Rangers how to tie them around their faces. Ringnick, totally sober, having arrived early, was the first to take a cloth, and he thanked them for it. "These are to keep you from breathing in the spores that infected the goblins," Laggy informed them. "We look like footpads with these things on," said Deertick. "You look like a footpad on your best day, with or without a mask. Women will bang their shutters closed when you walk through town," laughed Leaftuck. "All right, you boys, settle down," one of the Rangers from the other squad said. "I am Thomas, and the captain has put me in charge of this mission. We are heading to the last area where trouble was reported. We Rangers like to travel fast, so try to keep up," he asserted, looking directly at Laggy and Barko. There were 9 Rangers in total. Normally, with 2 squads, there would have been 10. But they were shy 1 man, because Ringnick's squad had lost Jakol in the first battle of the Goblin Cave, and there had been no reserves left to replace him. The Rangers were moving at a fast clip, heading to the north and west. They entered a large, cleared area and saw across the field 4 figures walking with axes. When they stopped, Laggy and Barko were breathing hard, but had managed to keep up despite the fast pace and the thin air of the mountains. One of the Rangers called out, "Goblins!" Thomas ordered, "Weapons out, shields up." "Barko and I will stand on the front line with the Rangers," stated Laggy, looking at Thomas. "Laggy, it is your life. Feel free to lose it how you choose," replied Thomas. True to goblin form, the goblins turned and started heading towards the Rangers. When they got close enough, they picked up their pace and began to run. Laggy and Barko stood side by side. They focused and connected to the energy of the web of life. Their hands started glowing. With their palms facing forward and their fingers extended, they raised them, aiming at the oncoming goblins. A ball of light flew from Laggy's hands, went wide, and missed the goblins. "He fired light from his hands," said a Ranger. Seeing the light, some of the Rangers adjusted the position of their feet nervously as they glanced over at Laggy and Barko. Laggy frowned at his lack of control. "Need to focus better," he thought. A ball of light came from Barko's hands and hit the ground directly in front of him, and he frowned as well. The goblins, undeterred, continued their charge and were closing the gap between them quickly. "They are missing. Prepare for impact," yelled Thomas. Another ball of light flew from Laggie's hands and struck a goblin. It flew backwards, knocked completely off its feet, and landed on the ground with a thump, not moving. "That one worked," yelled Deertick. A ball of light flew from Barco's hands and grazed a goblin, and its shoulder twisted back from the hit, yet it still came. The goblins were directly on top of the rangers. Laggie aimed, and a ball of light, this one brighter and stronger, hit a goblin and threw it backwards. The blast was so wide and bright it took down a second goblin standing next to it. "Got to be careful," he thought. "Too much and I might kill unintentionally." "Two at a time," yelled Leaftuck. Barco focused forward and fired, directly hitting and knocking a goblin to the ground. There was total silence, and a look of shock on the rangers' faces. Thomas walked up and nudged one of them with his foot. "Are they dead?" "No, they are knocked out. We might have killed them, but we hope to heal them, not kill them," Laggie answered. "We have mixed the cure with water. Take these water skins and force some into their mouths after you tie them up with ropes. Make sure they get a swallow or two." The rangers finished the work quickly and efficiently. "Now what do we do with them?" asked Thomas. "We carry them back to the camp and keep an eye on them." They took the goblins back to the camp. Everyone gathered around when they arrived. The rumors were flying about what had happened in the goblin field that day. The captain asked that they report to him immediately. "This was a great day for the rangers. We have Laggie and Barco to thank for this," congratulated the captain. "It is the first time we have fought the goblins without any losses." The captain looked at Laggie and Barco and said, "You might want to have a talk with this woman. Her name is Calandra, and she has travelled from a town that borders the Cold Sea, called Galassi. She followed a hawk to get here." Calandra emerged from the shadows, her face partially obscured by her long, flowing dark hair. "Hi, I'm Calandra." Barco smiled. "I am Barco from Dasilia. Are all the women from Galassi so beautiful?" he asked, struck by her beauty. Her dark eyes met his, and she smiled back and blushed a little at his compliment. "I am Laggie from the islands of the Hot Sea. Let's meet back at the campsite, have a meal and talk." That evening, Laggie and Barco had a long talk with Calandra. They found her story to be much like their own. She had visited the ancient trees. Unlike Laggie and Barco's home, Calandra's hometown had not yet been infected by the sickness, nor had she heard of the illness until she arrived in Liguria. They wondered if there were any more people like themselves. Laggie turned in for the night, but Calandra and Barco continued to talk long after the fire had gone down. That evening, Ringnick, Deertick, Fench, and Leaftuck sat about the fire in the campsite, and for the first time in a long time, Ringnick was not drunk. The conversation was lively. "Ringnick, you are sober tonight. That is a welcome change," said Leaftuck bluntly. "The captain is sending for reinforcements. He intends to lay siege to the Goblin Cave. My wife is in there. I just know it. We can find her and rescue her," said Ringnick, undeterred by Leaftuck's comment. "Even with the help of Laggie, Barco, and Calandra, those caves are going to be very difficult to attack. You remember those big hairy creatures?" Deertick reminded everyone. "The captain wants us to try nets on the goblins," said Fench. "I don't know if you can net one of those big buggers," said Leaftuck. "It was horrible in that cave, and Jacol," said Deertick, pausing. Interrupting, Fench said, "I think the captain wants to lay siege to them and force them to come out of the cave and into the field of battle." "I wonder if that will work?" asked Leaftuck. The next morning, Laggie was up early to visit the captured goblins. He noticed in the nearby trees a hawk and a falcon watching him. He stopped by and checked on Palu and Sis to make sure they were okay. He gave Sis some dry jerky meat to eat and some water to drink. Palu wasn't thirsty. After Sis ate and drank, he took a moment and brushed the side of her head and neck gently with the back of his finger. She relaxed, and her eyes closed sleepily as she did so. The captured goblins' appearance were starting to change. Their colour was much better, and their skin was a little smoother. Laggy had been asked to meet with the captain early that morning and report. "Outward appearances are that the captured goblins are improving," said the captain. "This is the best news I have had in some time." "How do you do this thing with the light?" "We are connected to the web of life. The connection is strong with us. It is these energies we tap into, and we focus them," said Laggy. "We are still learning how to do this. It seems to me that we are improving our skills and getting better." "The web? Can my rangers do this?" wondered the captain out loud. "We think there are others who can do this too. We don't know how many or how to find them," said Laggy, "but they seem to be finding us. I want to send the 3 of you on another mission today. We are going to make some changes this time. We think you should carry shields in one hand for protection. Do you think you could still do this with the light while carrying a shield?" asked the captain. "I am willing to give it a try," said Laggy. The other 2 nodded in agreement. "Okay," the captain said. "I hope they don't catch on fire," said Finch, smiling, as he handed Laggy a wooden shield. "Some of the boys have finished fashioning nets. We would like to try them today," said the captain. Thomas held up one of the nets to show the others. "Another thing," continued the captain, "the 3 of you need to be better protected by the rangers. We don't like the idea of you standing in front without proper protection. I want you to work out something better with the squads. Oh, and we are going to send 2 additional squads with you today," concluded the captain. Laggy nodded, then said, "Captain, I have something else we need to discuss." He paused a moment in awkward silence. "My home island is also infected by this, as is Barco's home country. We will be returning to our home soon to help them fight it." The captain looked disappointed, and Calandra frowned a little. "I just wanted you to know up front what we were planning. When we finish learning what we came here to learn, and we finish sharing and teaching what we know, then we will leave," concluded Laggy. The captain nodded in return. "Captain, I don't want to speak for Calandra, but her country is not yet infected, and she has indicated some willingness to stay on longer and help you." "Yes, Captain, I can stay," she nodded in agreement. "Okay, Laggy. Thanks for being direct and upfront. I like that about you. You would have made a good ranger. Your help has given us the first hope we have had since all this started. I'm going to send a squad back to Rhizon today with news of these developments and to ask for reinforcements. We intend to lay siege to the Goblin Cave soon," said the captain. 4 ranger squads were waiting when Calandra joined them. This time she would march with them as well. Word had gotten around about the morning meeting with the captain, and especially about strangers wielding the energies of the web of life. The rangers started to refer to the wielders of light as webmasters. The rangers wanted to discuss giving the webmasters more protection by having them stand behind the ranger lines, or at least with rangers stationed on either side of them, ready to give protection if needed. Today the webmasters agreed to being surrounded by rangers, but still close to the front line with a clear shot, and everyone agreed to stay flexible in their approaches so they could make adjustments if needed. They began their march to the north and west. When they arrived in the goblin fields, Much like the day before, there was a group of goblins in the distance. This time, there were 5 of them. Thomas ordered the men to arms, and everyone took their positions. The goblins were clearly outnumbered, yet they still came. When the goblins got close, they picked up their pace and started to charge. Laggy, Barco, and Calandra's hands began to glow. They stood resolutely, each with their own rangers protecting them on both sides and from behind. Laggy fired a ball of light first. His shot went wide, missing the target. Barco scored a direct hit, and down went a goblin. Calandra fired and narrowly missed. Undaunted, the goblins continued their charge. Laggy fired another ball of light and missed again. "Focus," he thought with quite determination. Barco fired with a direct hit, and the goblin's body twisted from the force, but it kept coming. Calandra fired and narrowly missed again. She stomped her foot in frustration. "It's my first time out, and it shows," she thought, frowning a bit. The goblins were now directly on top of the rangers. "Brace!" Thomas commanded. With increased focus, Laggy launched a ball of light that made a direct hit. Another goblin went down. Barco fired and stopped one in its tracks, where it fell unconscious. Calandra fired and narrowly missed again. After their losses, 2 goblins remained on their feet. One was bearing down on Laggy, and the other on Barco. The ranger to the right of Laggy was carrying a net, which he threw at the goblin at the last second, just missing. The ranger standing to Laggy's left thrusted his sword, but was blocked by the lower half of his opponent's axe handle. He then tried to raise his shield up higher, but it was too late. The goblin brought its axe straight down on the ranger's head, killing him instantly. At point-blank range, Laggy fired a ball of light and struck down the same goblin that had just killed the ranger. "I was too late," he chilted himself. The last goblin bore down on Barco. Ringnick was to his left, and another ranger was to his right. The ranger to the right held the net, which he threw at the last instant. Attempting to swing its axe, the goblin fell to the ground, entangled in the net. Rangers jumped in and held the goblin down, while others tied it up with ropes and forced it to drink the antidote. Other rangers gathered around their fallen brother. There was nothing they could do for him. The wound inflicted was instantly fatal. The rangers tied up the other goblins, gave them the antidote, and carried them back to camp. Calandra walked over to Barco and asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes," he answered. "I was worried that you might be hurt. You fought bravely. They came on us with such ferocity and disregard for their own well-being," said Calandra. "Thanks for your concern. You fought bravely as well," he said, and he smiled at her. They walked together and talked on the return trip to the camp, getting to know each other better. There was another meeting with the captain when they arrived back at camp. "Thomas, give me a report," ordered the captain. "Another ranger lost," Thomas said quietly, pausing for a few moments of silence. "This time they were extremely outnumbered, yet they came anyway. They fight with reckless abandon. They have no concern for their own well-being. We captured 5 of them and administered the antidote. Calandra fought bravely," he said as he looked at her and gave her a nod. "This is Paul," the captain said, pointing to the man standing in the corner. "He arrived while you were gone. He appears to be one of you. Paul is from an area just north of Liguria, near the Northern Alps. I filled him in on what was going on and asked him to spend time with the 3 of you when you got back to camp. I am ordering another mission for tomorrow. Everyone, be ready at first light," said the captain. Laggy, Barco, and Calandra introduced themselves to Paul and walked back to camp together and lit a campfire and had dinner. After dinner, they sat on some logs placed around the fire. Laggy sat next to the condor, Sis sat quietly next to Laggy as he stroked her neck gently with the back of his fingers. The reflecting light of the fire danced on her eyes and her black feathers. Tiny sparks lifted out of the fire on the hot air, rising from the burning embers. A wisp of grey smoke rose with them. The smell of burning wood permeated the air. Barco sat next to Calandra. Catherine and Rua sat on the log and leaned into each other. Catherine rested her head on Rua's shoulder. Lastly, Paul joined the group. "Paul, how came you to this place?" asked Laggy. "I followed a cardinal here," Paul said, waving the campfire smoke from his eyes. He looked at the others, waiting for a reaction. "I followed this condor," Laggy said. Paul smiled and appeared to relax a little. "I followed a desert falcon," said Barco. "I followed a red-tailed hawk," said Calandra with a smile. "Paul, you aren't alone, and you aren't crazy," said Laggy. "I came from an island located in the hot sea. This condor led me to the ancient forest. Once there, something spoke to me. A light. It showed me the threat we face. I saw that this has happened before, long ago." Paul had tears in his eyes. "I thought I was going crazy." "It's okay. We all thought we were going crazy," replied Laggy. "You should have seen the look on the faces of my people on the island when I told them I wanted to follow a bird across the hot sea. No one has ever ventured there, and for good reason. It is very dangerous to cross, but Sis helped me." Laggy looked directly at Paul. "Did you experience the connection with the web of life? Did you feel it?" asked Laggy. "When the light spoke to me, it showed me the connection I have to it," said Paul. "My hands were tingling and glowed afterwards. We have used it in a battle against the goblins with some success. Before we go to sleep tonight, we will show you how to use it, how to focus and control it better," said Laggy. "These goblins behave so strangely," said Paul. "They remind me of insects," said Calandra, "like bees in a hive. Hive bees have specific jobs to perform, and they do their jobs relentlessly. Defenders will fight to the death no matter what the odds against them. But not creatures nor insects. They are us, with an infection that is controlling them, and we have been shown how to heal them," replied Laggy. Barco spoke up. "My home country of Dacilia is already under assault from the illness. The spores must have been carried on the winds or by a bird. It got to Laggy's island too." Laggy nodded. "I am very concerned about the well-being of my islands. It is getting late. I will spend some time with Paul before I go to bed. We have an early start tomorrow. Try to get some rest." The next morning, Laggy rose early and noticed in the nearby trees a hawk, a falcon, and a red bird watching him. They cocked their heads at him as he walked by. He checked on his little brown goat Palu and Sis to make sure they were okay. He gave Sis some dried, jerky meat and water. Palu still showed no interest. "The goat can take care of himself," he thought as he stroked the condor's neck with the back of his fingers. It pleased him to see that the first goblins they captured and treated had regained their abilities to think and talk clearly. Their colouring had returned to normal. These were good signs. Laggy was very happy to see it. Laggy and Barco took a walk and stopped by the ranger tent to ask Thomas and Finch to meet with them in the captain's tent. They entered the captain's tent. He sat alone in his chair. Laggy started with, "Captain, the first goblins we treated with the antidote are greatly improved and, aside from a little weakness, appear mostly cured." The captain smiled. "The gods be praised. That is good news," he said. "Barco and I will not be joining the mission today. We have decided to leave. We will travel together through Illyria and go our separate ways at Varna. I have talked with Paul, and he will stay on with Calandra to help you with your struggles here," Laggy informed the captain. "Laggy, I have some things for you before you go. You aren't dressed properly for the winters here. I have some warm clothing for you and your companions. You'll need it for the journey out of the mountains, as it is starting to get cold," offered the captain. "Thank you," Laggy said, taking the clothing. The captain also handed a scroll to Laggy. "Here is a letter to our king, as well as a map. Could you please deliver it directly to him? This letter tells the king who you are and asks that he listen to you and that he hear your story. I have another letter for General Jackman. The general needs to be there when you meet with the king." "I will see to it," said Laggy. "Laggy, you have our thanks and gratitude. We wish you good luck and safe travels," said the captain. Laggy gave the captain a big hug. "Good luck to you and your rangers." The captain returned the hug somewhat stiffly. Then Laggy turned and hugged Finch and Thomas too. Laggy and Barco stopped by and said their goodbyes to Calandra and Paul. Calandra looked disappointed. "So soon? I had hoped you could stay longer." "I am sorry," said Barco, "but things are very bad in Dasilia. I promise to return to help you after I finish there." He gave her a big hug, and they lingered there for the longest time, as emotions stirred deep inside them. Then Laggy hugged Paul and Calandra. "Best of luck to both of you. You are very brave to stand and fight with the Rangers." Laggy joined Rua, Katrin, and Palu, with the condor riding on his back. Barco and his falcon were now a part of their group. They started down the road to Rhizon. The falcon took flight and circled above them as they walked down the road, stirring up a little dust as they went. "By the gods, that bird is fast," thought Laggy, as he watched it fly.